The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. I'm going to hydrate a little bit. Why does the background seem so familiar to me? I don't know. Cool, an audiobook. Nice. An audiobook. Yes. The sun was already sinking into the deep green of the hills to the west of the valley, the red and gray pink of its shadows touching the corners of the land, when Flick Olmsford began his descent. The trail stretched out unevenly down the northern slope, winding through the huge boulders which studded the rugged terrain in massive clumps, disappearing into the thick forests of the lowlands to reappear in brief glimpses in small clearings and thinning spaces of the woodland. Flick followed the familiar trail with his eyes as he trudged wearily along, his light pack slung loosely over one shoulder. His broad, wind-burned face bore a set, placid look, and only the wide gray eyes revealed the restless energy that burned beneath the calm exterior. He was a young man, though his stocky build and the grizzled brown hair and shaggy eyebrows made him look much older. He wore the loose-fitting work clothes of the Vale. People in the pack he carried were several metal implements that rolled and clanked loosely against one another. There was a slight chill in the evening air, and Flick clutched the collar of his open wool shirt closer to his neck. His journey ahead lay through forests and rolling flatlands, the latter not yet visible to him as he passed into the forests, and the darkness of the tall oaks and somber hickories reached upward to overlap and blot out the cloudless night sky. The sun had set, leaving only the deep blue of the heavens pinpointed by thousands of friendly stars. The huge trees shut out even these, and Flick was left alone in the silent darkness as he moved slowly along the beaten path. Because he had traveled this same route 100 times, the young man noticed immediately the unusual stillness that seemed to have captivated the entire valley this evening. The familiar buzzing and chirping of insects normally present in the quiet of the night, the cries of the birds that awoke with the setting of the sun to fly in search of food, all were missing. Flick listened intently for some sound of life, but his keen ears could detect nothing. He shook his head uneasily. The deep silence was unsettling, particularly in view of the rumors of a frightening black-winged creature sighted in the night skies north of the valley only days earlier. He forced himself to whistle and turned his thoughts back to his day's work in the country just to the north of the Vale, where outlying families farmed and tended domestic livestock. He traveled to their homes every week, supplying various items that they required and bringing bits of news to the happenings of the Vale and occasionally the distant cities of the deep Southland. Few people knew the surrounding countryside as well as he did, and fewer still cared to travel beyond the comparative safety of their homes in the valley. Men were more inclined to remain in isolated communities these days, and let the rest of the world get along as best it could. But Flick liked to travel outside the valley from time to time, and the outlying homesteads were in need of his services, and were willing to pay him for the trouble. Flick's father was not one to let an opportunity pass him by where there was money to be made, and the arrangement seemed to work out well for all concerned. A low-hanging branch brushed against his head, causing Flick to start suddenly and leap to one side. In chagrin, he straightened himself and glared back at the leafy obstacle before continuing his journey at a slightly quicker pace. He was deep in the lowland forest now, and only slivers of moonlight were able to find their way through the thick boughs overhead to light the winding path dimly. It was so dark that Flick was having trouble finding the trail, and as he studied the lay of the land ahead, he again found himself conscious of the heavy silence. It was as if all life had been suddenly extinguished, and he alone remained to find his way out of the forest tomb. Again, he recalled the strange rumors. He felt a bit anxious in spite of himself, and glanced worriedly around. But nothing stirred on the trail ahead, nor moved in the trees about him, and he felt embarrassingly relieved. Pausing momentarily in a moonlit clearing, he gazed at the fullness of the night sky before passing abruptly into the trees beyond. He walked slowly, picking his way along the winding path that had narrowed beyond the clearing and now seemed to disappear into a wall of trees and bushes ahead. He knew that it was merely an illusion, but found himself glancing about uneasily all the same. A few moments later, he was again on a wider trail and could discern bits of sky peeking through the heavy trees. He was almost to the bottom of the valley and about 2 miles from his home. He smiled and began whistling an old tavern song as he hurried on. He was so intent on the trail ahead and the open land beyond the forest that he failed to notice the huge black shadow that seemed to rise up suddenly, detaching itself from a great oak tree on his left and moving swiftly toward the path to intercept him. The dark figure was almost on top of the Veilman before Flick sensed its presence looming before him like a great black stone, which threatened to crush his smaller being. With a startled cry of fear, he leaped aside, his pack falling to the path with a crash of metal, and his left hand whipped out the long, thin dagger at his waist. Even as he crouched to defend himself, he was stayed by a commanding arm raised above the figure before him, and a strong yet reassuring voice that spoke out quickly. "Wait a moment, friend. I am no enemy, and I have no wish to harm you. I merely seek directions and would be grateful if you could show me the proper path." Wait a moment. Hold on. Flick relaxed his guard a bit and tried to peer into the blackness of the figure before him in an effort to discover some semblance of a human being. He could see nothing. However, and he moved to the left with cautious steps in an attempt to catch the features of the dark figure in the tree-shadowed moonlight. "I assure you I mean no harm," the voice continued, as if reading the Veilman's mind. "I did not mean to frighten you, but I didn't see you until you were almost upon me, and I was afraid you might pass me by without realizing I was there." The voice stopped, and the huge black figure stood silently, though Flick could feel the eyes following him as he edged about the path to put his own back to the light. Slowly, the pale moonlight began to etch out the stranger's features in vague lines and blue shadows. For a long moment, the two faced one another in silence, each studying each other. Flick, in an effort to decide what it was he faced, the stranger in quiet anticipation. Then suddenly, the huge figure lunged with terrible swiftness, his powerful hand seizing the Veilman's wrists, and Flick was lifted abruptly off the solid earth and held high, his knife dropping from nerveless fingers as the deep voice laughed mockingly up at him. "Well, well, my young friend, what are you going to do now, I wonder? I would cut your heart out on the spot and leave you for the wolves if I chose, couldn't I?" Flick struggled violently to free himself, terror numbing his mind to any thought but that of escape. But he had no idea what manner of creature had subdued him. But it was far more powerful than any normal man and apparently prepared to dispatch Flick quickly. Then abruptly, his captor held him out at arm's length, and the mocking voice became icy cold with displeasure. Enough of this, boy. We have played our little game, and still you know nothing of me. I'm tired and hungry and have no wish to be delayed on the forest trail in the chill of the evening while you decide if I am man or beast. I will set you down and you may show me the path. I warn you, do not try to run from me or it will be the worse for you. The strong voice trailed off and the tone of displeasure disappeared as the former hint of mockery returned with a short laugh. Besides, the figure rumbled as the fingers released their iron grasp, and Flick slipped to the path. I may be a better friend than you realize. The figure moved back a step as Flick straightened himself, rubbing his wrists carefully to restore the circulation to his numbed hands. He wanted to run, but was certain that the stranger would catch him again, and this time finish him without further thought. He leaned over cautiously and picked up the fallen dagger, returning it to his belt. Flick could see the fellow more clearly now, and a quick scrutiny of him revealed that he was definitely human, though much larger than any man Flick had ever seen. He was at least 7 feet tall, but exceptionally lean, though it was difficult to be certain about this, since his tall frame was wrapped in a flowing black cloak with a loose cowl pulled close about his head. The darkened face was long and deeply lined, giving it a craggy appearance. The eyes were deep-set and almost completely hidden from view by shaggy eyebrows that nodded fiercely over a long, flat nose. Midland Zeta hello. A short black beard outlined a wide mouth that was just a line on the face, a line that never seemed to move. The overall appearance was frightening, all blackness and size, and Flick had to fight down the urge building within him to make a break for the forest's edge. He looked straight into the deep, hard eyes of the stranger, though not without some difficulty, and managed a weak smile. I thought you were a thief, he mumbled hesitantly. You were mistaken, was the quiet retort. Then the voice softened a bit. You must learn to know a friend from an enemy. Sometimes your life may depend on it. Now then, let's have your name. Flick Ohmsford. Flick hesitated, and then continued in a slightly braver tone of voice. My father is Curzod Ohmsford. He manages an inn in the Shady Vale, a mile or two from here. You could find lodging and food there. Ah, Shady Vale, the stranger exclaimed suddenly. Yes, that is where I am going. He paused as if reflecting on his own words. Flick watched him cautiously as he rubbed his craggy face with crooked fingers and looked beyond the forest's edge to the rolling grasslands of the valley. He was still looking away when he spoke again. You have a brother. It was not a question. It was a simple statement of fact. It was spoken so distantly and calmly, as if the tall stranger were not at all interested in any sort of a reply, that Flick almost missed hearing it. Then suddenly, realizing the significance of the remark, he started and looked quickly at the other. How did... Oh, well, the man said. Doesn't every young Valeman like yourself have a brother somewhere? Flick nodded dumbly, unable to comprehend what it was that the other was trying to say, and wondering vaguely how much he knew about Shady Vale. The stranger was looking questioningly at him, evidently waiting to be guided to the promised food and lodging. Flick quickly turned away to find this hastily discarded pack, picked it up, and slung it over his shoulder, looking back at the figure towering over him. The path is this way, he pointed, and the two began walking. They passed out of the deep forest and entered rolling, gentle hills, which they would follow to the hamlet of Shady Vale at the far end of the valley. Out of the woods, it was a bright night. The moon was a full white globe overhead, its glow clearly illuminating the landscape of the valley and the path which two travelers were following. The path itself was a vague line winding over the grassy hills and distinguishable only by occasional rain-washed ruts and flat, hard patches of earth breaking through the heavy grass. The wind had gathered strength and rushed at the two men with quick gusts that whipped at their clothing as they walked, forcing them to bow their heads slightly to shield their eyes. Neither spoke a word as they proceeded, each concentrating on the lay of the land beyond, as new hills and small depressions appeared with the passing of each traveled knoll. Except for the rushing of the wind, the night remained silent. Flick listened intently, and once he thought he heard a sharp cry far to the north, but an instant later it was gone, and he did not hear it again. The stranger appeared to be unconcerned with the silence. His attention seemed to be focused on a constantly changing point on the ground some 6 feet in front of them. He did not look up, and he did not look at his young guide for directions as they went. Instead, he seemed to know exactly where the other was going and walked confidently beside him. After a while, Flick began to have trouble keeping pace with the tall man, who traveled the path with long, swinging strides that dwarfed Flick's shorter ones. At times, the Veilman almost had to run to keep up. Once or twice, the other man glanced down at his smaller companion and, seeing the difficulty he was having in trying to match strides, slowed to an easier pace. Finally, as the southern slopes of the valley drew near, the hills began to level off into shrub-covered grasslands that hinted at the appearance of new forests. The terrain began to dip downward at a gentle slope. And Flick located several familiar landmarks that bounded the outskirts of the Shady Vale. He felt a surge of relief in spite of himself. The hamlet and his own warm home were just ahead. The stranger did not speak a single word during the brief journey, and Flick was reluctant to attempt any conversation. Instead, he tried to study the giant in quick glimpses as they walked, without permitting the other to observe what he was doing. He was understandably odd. The long, craggy face, shaded by the deep black beard, recalled the fearful warlocks described to him by stern elders before the glowing embers of a late evening fire when he was only a child. Most frightening were the stranger's eyes, or rather, the deep, dark caverns beneath shaggy brows where his eyes should be. Flick could not penetrate the heavy shadows that continued to mask the entire area of his face. The deeply lined countenance seemed carved from stone, fixed and bowed slightly to the path before it. As Flick pondered the inscrutable visage, he suddenly realized that the stranger never even mentioned his name. It's actually not bad. I made it through 8 pages, I think. But all right, let's see if we can find somebody to raid. Let's see. Who do we got? Who do we got? Who do we got? You know, I haven't rated. Let's see. I've rated Lucian recently, but we haven't visited Meowpie in a while. Let's see. Let me get that rolling real quick. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So, folks, thank you all so much for coming by tonight. This was fantastic, and I'm actually happy to actually get like Butsterpiece Theater rolling again. Even though like just reading for 20 minutes just actually kind of took quite a bit out of me. I haven't done that since like Final Fantasy 14 type stuff back in the day. But holy heck, tomorrow and Friday are both typically nights off for me. The next time I'm going to be live is actually Saturday morning. We're getting together with our good hackin' friend Yorialu, and we're going to be playing some Pokemon Emerald Soul Link Randomizer Nuzlocke. That's going to be awesome. And after what happened last week, I think it's gonna be quite a bit more challenging this time. So yeah, get ready for that. That's gonna be a good time. If you can't make that stream, I will be streaming again that night. Jedi Fallen Order, which is our typical Saturday night thing for now. But yeah, y'all, when we hop on over to Meowpie's stream, Meowpie is probably one of my favorite streamers. Yeah, Miyapi is a super good bean, and their streams are just always heckin' super entertaining. And I could easily way overdo it and never and not go to bed on time.
Nice butt, Hottie.